Well, you're muted.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. We have two proposals, 2F and 2G, that I'd like to bring forward. What I would like to do is have a presentation from 2F, which has Mayor Pro Tem Johnston and Councilmember Marcano, and then after that, have Mayor Coffman present his proposal, and then we have the discussion on both proposals, any kind of questions and comments, and then after that, we decide what we want to move forward. So, I'm going to start with Mayor Pro Tem Johnston and Councilmember Marcano to start their proposal 2F.
All right.
Thank you.
Could somebody pass me presenter privileges, please?
Councilmember Marcano?
Yeah, could someone please pass me presenter privileges? Can y'all hear me?
Mayor Marcano, would you present?
Yes, we have a presentation. We're just need Councilmember Marcano to have presenter privileges. So I think, there we are. Thank you.
It is done. All right. Thank you. All right. Mayor Pro Tem, do you want to kick us off here?
Yes, please. Thank you. Well, we really wanted to give a visual to the backup. We know that in the backup includes the actual ordinance. And then hearing from council members, we also included an executive summary that shortens the content of the ordinance, and also a sample guide that of what could look like to the potential candidates. So that's all in there. But in addition to that, we're giving you an overview, just a few slides that will discuss what this reform actually does. So what this reform does is it puts new limits on campaign contributions. Of course, right now we don't have any limits at all, and this ordinance puts those new limits in. We have more frequent and transparent reporting. This is a real key for the public to be able to get more involved on what's happening with the campaigns. We believe the status quo is not effective in providing that. So this will provide regular reports much earlier and regularly to be accessed by the public. We also have stronger oversight and enforcement. We're proud that this ordinance is transparent and brings that to this process, but also has accountability. Right now, our system is just, to be quite honest, pretty weak. And if there are any violations, it's barely a slap on the wrist, and it's really not an incentive to do the best we can as candidates and independent expenditure committees. So this does strengthen that, to have that accountability that is so important. And then finally, it enhances accessibility for candidates to get more folks running, and to have a more clear process. By having in-depth information, we are able to provide more information. So we're going to have some slides that dig a little more deeper into this, but that's an overview of what the reform does.
Yep.
Councilmember Marcano?
All right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So don't worry, y'all, it's just 4 slides. So this won't take too long. So so the first major change is contributions. So you see I called out natural persons here because that's one of the goals of this reform, is to make it so that natural persons really are the ones that are driving fundraising in our elections. And the limits you see here, they've traveled quite a way. When we began this process, they started at 320 across the board for any race. And the reason for that is we looked at what the state limits were, and we saw that our wards were about 80%, give or take, the size of a House district. So, 80% of 400, which is what the limit is for the state, is 320. So that's where we started. But after talking to some of y'all, we know that there were some concerns about, our at-large races and our mayoral race, that 320 felt a little low. And this was a big area of compromise, personally for me, because I feel that if you're running for a larger seat, it's incumbent upon you to not just garner more support in votes, but also more support in fundraising from a broader base of folks. And that's also consistent with how the state is structured, where you have $400 for a House district race and $400 for a state Senate race. So that said, we heard you, and we changed the limits to $400 for our ward races and $800 for the at-large and mayoral races per cycle per candidate. So the second point is we have basically taken artificial persons out of the equation when it comes to fundraising. So that means you can only accept direct contributions from living, breathing people, and any kind of business entity is not able to contribute directly to a candidate. Small donor committees were kind of the Wild West previously. So what we did is we took a kind of like a page out of best practices for these kinds of reforms, and we set them to be 10 times the limit of an individual contribution. And for those of y'all who are watching who might not know, small donor committees are basically groupings of contributions from individuals of no more than $50. So the idea is that since those are already limited to small initial contributions, the maximum that they can pool together is a little higher, but it's still, again, $50 from individual living, breathing people. And then the limit adjustments, the limits that you see here are not set in stone in perpetuity. Much like the state level limits, these actually adjust with the Consumer Price Index at a time period that is going to be synced with what the Secretary of State does. So in our case, that would be Q2 of 2023 and every 4 years after. These would adjust with the cost of living. So we won't be stuck at $400 and $800 forever. These would grow over time as, the cost of living increases and the cost of running campaigns continues to grow. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Marcano. I'm going to talk about transparency and disclosure a little more. With this ordinance, we have enhanced restrictions for coordinating, and that means coordination between campaigns and independent expenditure committees. Before, we didn't really have a lot of guidelines. It was vague. And again, something that we're really proud of. There is some length, but you know where to go for the information, and it provides clarity. So the committees, the independent expenditure committees and campaigns, the rules with coordination is clearly defined and strictly prohibited. We also have no anonymous contributions. Sometimes, there's the fishbowl effect, and there's anonymous contributions that might have been able to be accepted in the past. We are having a priority on every contribution must be itemized, and the source must be identified for that contribution. If the contributions cannot be identified, we did talk to some council members about where that may be extra money. We don't know how much that would be. It could be $5, could be a couple $100, but that it would be going back to the clerk's office to cover any costs associated with this ordinance, or even donated to charity. Some had asked about general fund, but the consensus we had was it going back to the clerk's office. We also have a new disclaimer requirements for political advertising in Aurora. As we know, these campaigns are becoming much more sophisticated, each campaign cycle with social media and even commercials now from the last election. So we are requiring municipal political advertisements that follow the state and federal political advertising requirements. You'll notice a lot of our requirements, we're just looking at that best practice of what's already happening in the state. And then we have expanded reporting requirements. As many of you know, I was able to make the change last year from going basically the reporting requirements just about the time ballots dropped to doing it 90 days before. But I'd said then, and now I'm finally doing it, I always wanted to do it much sooner, after someone declares their candidacy, to be able to get that information again to the public, to be able to follow that. So we now have 9 reporting periods. It's up from 4. Again, this is 4 candidates, and it's beginning January 31st for election years, and then twice annually for non-election years. Councilmember Marcano?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So on top of that, we also took a look at the existing penalties, and we brought them a little more up to par. Currently, for violations, I think the penalty is like $50 a day up to 15 days, something like that. It's extremely low, and for large IECs, it's not even really the cost of doing business. It may as well not even exist. So what we have done is we have revised that. The penalties start out very low, but do escalate if there is repeated, basically demonstrations of bad faith. They can go up to $10,000 or 3 times the amount of the violation in question, whichever is greater. We also included an opportunity to cure. This is something that came up after some of y'all saw the steeper penalties. We agree. We don't want to penalize people who make an honest mistake, whether they're candidates or independent expenditure committees. So the opportunity to cure now exists. So you do have 5 business days from the day you receive notice of a violation to make good, and everything will be fine, and we can move on from there. We also heard from y'all that there might be, this might invite frivolous complaints. So we took a look at what other municipalities who have similar reforms have on the books. And Boulder, actually, it turns out they require an affidavit complete with the name and the evidence for every complaint. So you can't just call up the city clerk and say, hey, we think someone did something wrong. You actually have to, and do that anonymously, you actually have to put your name to it and submit the evidence at the time of the complaint so that we know that there's a there and we're not just wasting time or harassing people. And then, of course, there's independent adjudication for any complaints that are found to have merit. And this is something really important because, I know that we've talked about maybe having the election commission do it or having it even handled by the city clerk's office or an appointee. We've heard from folks that is a little too close to council. Even the city clerk's office, they're not direct council appointees, but we do appoint the city manager who does hire the clerk. So what the proposal includes is basically a third party to adjudicate any legitimate complaints. And I have to stress that this is also something I want to say Boulder and a couple of other municipalities do, and it seldom, if ever, happens. But just in case we actually do run into that situation, we wanted to make sure that there is that independent adjudication feature here so that there's not even the appearance of impropriety when we're addressing these kinds of complaints. And Mayor Pro Tem, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. And finally, we wanted to say that we're addressing enhanced accessibility. Again, we've heard, yes, this is a longer ordinance than it was before. It's longer than Mayor Coffman's proposal. But with that, anyone who is reading that has clear expectations of where to find information and that it absolutely is covered. The detailed composition of this ordinance is really going to reduce the likelihood of litigation. And the candidate manual, we provided a sample just to give the courtesy of what that could look like. Obviously, the city clerk's office will put something out, but we really wanted to assure you that there's ways to address this accessibility through those systems. And we can have the executive summary, the education for the candidates, as well as that manual. And then another area that we're really proud of is, we want to be able to have parents be able to run for office. And childcare expenses are permitted. So that's another vehicle that really ensures moms or dads that might have young children. We don't want that to necessarily prevent them from running for office, but that it is an asset. So candidates will be able to use their campaign contributions on childcare. And the main thing is we're letting folks know. So when someone gives you a donation, we're singing this loud and proud that that's an allowable expense, and it will make running for office more accessible to candidates with children.
Yep. And that's all we have for our presentation. Like I said, we'd keep it short, and I believe we are going to move on to Mayor Coffman's next. Councilmember Lawson?
Yes, Mayor Coffman, to get your proposal for your presentation, please.
Let me stop sharing real quick. Oh, there it is. All right.
Mayor Coffman, you're muted.
Yes, I met with Stephen, our former clerk, before he left, and asked him what he thought campaign finance reform proposal ought to look like. And one thing he said, make it simple. Don't try and do everything at once, particularly in one proposal. Make it transparent, make it easy to enforce. And so in my proposal, it requires only contributions from natural persons, as is the Johnston-Marcano proposal. It provides limits of $1,000 for per election cycle for the mayor and for council members at large, and $500 per election cycle for ward members. It requires total transparency. Even everything is required to be reported, because you can turn in a small donor committee report and you just get the, as long as they follow the rules, you just get you essentially get the amount and you get the name of the committee. This requires every individual to have their address, their occupation, their full name on the report. It was the election commission that saw my proposal as a base to work on. They felt that they had a number of disagreements, or at least a majority, I think, with the Johnston-Marcano proposal. And so they added in occupation in terms of transparency, the reporting requirements. The county clerk would vet the complaints. And if the county clerk felt that it had merit, it would go to the election commission. The election commission would administratively then decide the complaint. They could do $50 up to $100 a fine on the individual. The candidate committee would have 72 hours in which to return the contribution in excess of the allowed amount. That's it.
Okay. Questions for the Johnston-Marcano proposal and Kaufman proposal?
If I could start.
Mayor Coffman.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. I just have some constitutional questions on the proposal. The first one is on page 13. Can you define to me when you say 13, it's 54103 A, and it goes, except as provided in subsection B of this section, an individual must organize a candidate committee pursuant to subparent C. Upon becoming a candidate under this article, a candidate may not organize, maintain, or control more than one candidate committee at any time. A candidate may not organize, maintain, control, or serve as an officer or treasurer of a political committee or issue committee. Could someone explain that to me?
I want to make sure I have your question right. It's about a candidate not serving as a treasurer on another committee?
Correct. It's a treasurer or officer. A candidate may not organize, maintain, control, or serve as an officer or treasurer of a political committee or issue committee. Can you give me the rest?
What page is that on?
It's on page 13. Top of page 13.
Of the backup.
Yeah. Okay. The copy I have is on 13.
What section?
So 54103.
Okay.
The question is around if it relates to A and C.
Okay.
I can dive in, and then
Sure.
Councilmember Marcano, if you want to add to it, and we can always get our city attorney as well. But quite simply, the intent is to keep things separate and clean. A candidate is a candidate, and they are running for office to do all of the other financial or other roles. We just didn't want to make it more complicated and any questions that could be raised, but I will have Councilmember Marcano answer that, please.
Yeah, another, I think, important part of the intent here is to deal with campaign coordination, which can run afoul of some election law. And the idea basically is that I can't be your treasurer, for your campaign. You can't be the treasurer for my campaign. And then we coordinate on finances and how we spend, because then you're running a coordinated campaign. So that, I believe, is the actual or the greater intent of that specific portion, is to keep candidacies independent.
There's already language in here that addresses coordination. This is a First Amendment problem, because what you're saying is, if I'm a candidate, I'm going to have fewer First Amendment rights that I'm not a candidate. If I'm a candidate, I give up some of my First Amendment rights. I can't run, for instance, an issue committee. I can't be involved in somebody else's campaign. That is a glaring First Amendment problem.
That's existing law. You can't.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Independent expenditure committee as a candidate already.
You can't for your own campaign. Absolutely. I mean, that's clear in the law as it exists today. But this is really different. A candidate may not organize, maintain, or control more than one candidate committee at a time. A candidate may not organize, maintain, control, or serve as an officer or treasurer of a political committee or issue committee. I mean, that is, so you're saying I have fewer First Amendment rights?
No, Mayor.
If I'm a candidate.
Mayor.
I think that's a problem.
Mayor Coffman, let Nicole, let Mayor Pro-Tem Johnston respond, and then Councilmember Coombs.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is an issue of addressing conflict of interest, which, again, the reason we're putting in these components is, quite frankly, we have the Wild West, and without having any rules at all and dipping into this committee and that committee and not having those restrictions is a conflict of interest, and the public doesn't want that. We want it more simplified.
Yeah, but you have to do it within the boundaries of the First Amendment. That is just not within the boundaries of the First Amendment. I know you don't get it, but, well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. But I think you really need to look at this after the fact and take a look at constitutional case law.
Mayor Coffman.
Sorry.
We've got to have a little bit of order. Councilmember Coombs has a question or a comment. Councilmember Coombs.
Yeah, so I think it's very clear, again, why we shouldn't have candidates being on any type of board for issue committees, and that is already the case. But also, if you're running for mayor, you're not going to be running for senator also at the same time, right? So you don't need to be having multiple issue committees open at the same time. Again, we're asking people to be transparent about what they're trying to do and to be engaging in good faith in our political process at the local level. And I also think that the disrespect to our colleagues of telling them they don't know what they're talking about when they actually consulted with attorneys and folks that have worked in this arena is just inappropriate.
I stand corrected.
Councilmember Marcano, did you have a comment?
No, ma'am. Councilmember Coombs covered what I wanted to say, so thank you.
Okay. Is there further questions? yes,
I have another one.
Councilmember Coffman.
Thank you. On page 17, 541045, subparent B. In addition to the requirements of subsection subparent A of this section, the disclaimer required for a political advertisement that is an independent expenditure or electioneering communication must clearly and conspicuously include the full names of the 5 persons who have made the largest aggregate contributions or donations of $1,000 or more during the election cycle to the person who paid for the advertisement. Now, in the summary you sent, of course, it was 3 persons. So you went from 3 persons to 5 persons. It's one thing about transparency. It's another thing about putting on onerous requirements for the purpose of having a chilling effect on speech. Another First Amendment problem in this proposal.
Okay.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you. So this is actually in standing with what's already required at the federal level. You may have, actually, frankly, having run for Congress previously, you're probably familiar with the fact that when you have these kinds of advertisements, let's say it's an IEC called Aurora for Puppies and Kittens, what this will require is, to list the 5 largest donors to Auroras for Puppies and Kittens, which could be, interest group ABC followed by the other 4 largest contributors to that. So this is actually not an onerous requirement. It is already in place elsewhere. Again, I really want to stress that, we worked with experts in this field who already have a successful track record of implementing these kinds of reforms. I sincerely doubt that anything in here is unconstitutional. If someone wants to challenge it, they're more than welcome to. You can get sued over anything. But I am confident that we have done our due diligence, Mayor. And I understand that you might not agree with these kinds of requirements, but they're not considered to be onerous under existing law.
Well, federal law is the name of the independent expenditure. It's not who were the 5 donors who gave. I mean, that takes a chunk of time in a 30-second ad. And the interesting thing is, here's the problem, is that many members rely on outside money that pays for canvassers and paid canvassers. And interesting, of course, there's no requirements on paid canvassers, which is a communication no different than any of these other communications.
So,
Councilmember Marcano?
Thank you. Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, any kind of literature being distributed by them would be subject to these same regulations. Not only that, any kind of other advertisements that they put out would also be subject to these same regulations. So I'm not exactly sure where the disconnect is there, Mayor.
But they're not required to say anything. No, it's just it's favoring one form of speech over another. Because there's a benefit to this speech, and so we'll make that protected, but there's not a benefit to this speech because we don't like it, so we're going to have discriminatory policies on that speech and put onerous requirements.
May I respond?
Wait. Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Johnston.
Thank you. I feel like this is, I won't say intentionally, but this is being framed in a way where you can keep saying the First Amendment, where it's not that issue. Again, we vetted this with our attorneys. We talked about communication in print or media. We are consistent throughout. And it's concerning to me that there would be this level of, I will say, concern brought up over transparency. This is what people deserve. This is what they get on other elections, such as at the federal level, and this is what we want for our voters to have here. So I am strongly supportive of continuing to have that in the ordinance.
54101.
Mayor, Councilmember Marcano was speaking before you. Go ahead,
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to reiterate, Mayor, that the intent and the language covers all speech in the same fashion. There's not like little carve-outs for a specific, unique niche of speech or anything like that. It all gets treated in the same way, whether it's coming from a big IEC or a local group or whatever the case may be.
Mayor Coffman?
54101, prohibited contributions. Please explain this. An issue committee or independent expenditure committee may not make a contribution to a candidate committee, recall defense committee, or political committee other than an independent expenditure committee. I just don't understand what that means. If you could explain that.
Sorry, Mayor, could you give us the page that you're on just to make it easier?
Well, I'm on 10, but I don't think it lines up with yours. It's 54101, section 54101 under prohibited contributions, subparent A.
Councilmember Marcano?
Yes. So what that means is that basically an independent expenditure committee cannot give to anything other than another independent expenditure committee for recalls. Since the language of our existing ordinance that this kind of was birthed off of treats them as 2 separate entities, that's why it is specifically spelled out that an IEC during a recall election, which is different than a regular election, cannot give directly to candidates or candidate committees.
Okay.
May I add to that, please?
Mayor Pro Tem Johnston?
This is another example, and as you'll see, we have it in here. If you have these questions in perhaps Mayor Coffman's proposal or our current rules, you can't find a lot of this information. And each of this, we have it in there, so when people have questions, they can come and find it. Thanks.
Is there any questions? Councilmember Murillo.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. This is actually not substantive. It was just generally, and this is how we draft ordinances, but we referred to the Colorado Revised Statute, CRS. So we're referring to other laws. Is there anywhere in this or in any of our documents, maybe this is City Attorney, that is outlining the fact that CRS is Colorado Revised Statutes?
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you. That's something that.
Mayor, can you mute your thing? Your papers are moving. You can't hear. Thank you.
Okay, he's muted now.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. So Councilmember Murillo, that's a good point. I think that's something that I'm fine with including like in an appendices or something like that if we're able to add that, just for clarification.
Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Hiltz.
Okay, Councilmember Hiltz. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at the block.
Only if that comment was done, because I don't want to interrupt, but I thought that was the only one. Yep. Okay. I just wanted to, for the general public, maybe get just an explanation on why we can't limit self-financing. And so if someone wanted to give themselves $75,000 or $100,000 to their own campaign, why that's not addressed in here. I just had a couple of questions about it, and I know that we on council know, but for the general public, I wanted to see if that could just be addressed on why that's not in here.
Yes, and Councilmember Marcano, I just thought for the public to hear, besides us, perhaps the city attorney referencing the court decision.
Sure.
On that.
Is the city attorney Lathers on this one?
Yes, if he's available. Otherwise, neither Councilmember Marcano and I can speak to it, but it gives a little more.
Is City Attorney Lathers on the phone? On the line?
He's on the call. He's just muted.
Okay. Can you unmute yourself, City Attorney Lathers?
I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, a great question. And I'm not sure specifically which case the council members are referring to. I know that generally that happens to be true. Council Member McConnell, which case were you referring to specifically, like exposition on?
I don't have it memorized, but I also know that it's unconstitutional.
Mayor Coffman?
The Vallejo decision. I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah, Buckley versus Vallejo. The Supreme Court decision has got to be 40 years old now at this point in time. And they were speaking to the First Amendment concerns, not dissimilar from what the mayor was speaking to. And the question in there was, how much can free speech of an individual be restricted or corralled, gathered in by campaign finance laws? This goes back a long time, people trying to address these issues. And the Supreme Court has always been, I won't say hostile, but they've been cautious in dealing with this. They find no speech protected in the First Amendment as important as campaign speech. They feel like it goes central to our democracy, to our entire system. They are, and always have been, reluctant to restrict finance, feeling that finance gets a message out into the public fora fairly clearly. They understand probably the same guidelines that have been incorporated in Colorado's Constitution in Article 28, the first section, that campaign contributions can potentially skew a system. So they are willing to talk about that. Certainly they're very, very friendly to disclosure. But when it comes to an individual supporting their own speech or their own candidacy, standing for themselves, forwarding their own interest rather than the interest of other people, to participate in the democratic system, to stand up for what they believe and what they're putting forward. They're extremely reluctant to limit that expression and have not done so. The question did arise, but they said, no, they're not going there because that is just so central to a strict scrutiny examination of what the First Amendment means. They won't go there.
Councilmember Hiltz,
Thank you.
another question?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up if I could, and it's more of a comment, and I understand that from a legal perspective. I think it just shines a light on how, when it comes to, free speech, it's just some people have more free speech than others, and that's, stemming from how much money people have, and it's really unfortunate that that's taken advantage of in a democratic election. So it's unfortunate that that couldn't be addressed, but understandable and on no fault of the sponsors across the board, obviously.
Additional questions? Am I looking?
Question. Oh, sorry. I have something.
Oh, Councilmember Bergan.
Can someone explain the 54-101 prohibited contributions on why an independent expenditure committee cannot make a contribution to a recall committee?
Councilmember Marcano?
Yes. Again, I think we touched on this a little bit, but an IEC is different than a candidate committee, and we prohibit non-candidate committees basically from giving to candidates unless I think the sole exception is a small donor committee, just because but it's actually comprised of individual people, and there's already existing state law around that kind of activity. So yeah, again, an independent expenditure committee has a different purpose, and it's not, natural persons, basically.
Additional questions? Councilmember Gardner?
I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about who contributions were allowed from. I believe both proposals limit contributions from individuals only. And at least with the Johnston and Marcano proposal, there's been several references to state campaign finance law. And I think most people are aware under state campaign finance law, there are contributions allowed from some business entity types, specifically LLCs. And for, I guess, explanation purposes for those that aren't aware, an LLC is really, from a tax perspective, a pass-through business entity where profits and losses are the individuals, and so they're looked at or treated typically as an individual. And so I'm curious why that wasn't allowed or it wasn't copied over from state law, even though there's several other instances where we use state law as the model for developing this ordinance.
May I respond?
Mayor Pro Tem Johnston.
Thank you. There were a couple reasons we didn't include that, and I know that we've had some similar questions from other council members as well on that. One is we really heard about the concern of the city clerk's office and monitoring different systems and handling the LLC system that is similar to the state's, the paperwork, the requirements, the follow through. So one reason is we didn't want to put that additional work or burden on the city clerk. But another, to be honest, even if that was addressed, is we worked really hard to make it clear of individuals, voters were getting contributions from individuals, and that businesses, corporations are not people. And that we wanted to, since we've had all of these kind of checks in place and trying to really shine a light on potential loopholes for dark money, we wanted to just simplify it and say we are just taking the contributions from individuals. If businesses want to form a PAC, independent expenditure committees are allowed, small donor committees, there are those vehicles. And again, that would be transparent for reporting. But we just felt it was really important to limit those contributions to individuals. And I'll have, if Councilmember Marcano wanted to add anything that I may have forgotten.
Yes. So I also just want to add one more thing. Allowing LLCs to contribute is basically allowing some folks a pre-tax contribution option, whereas workers do not have that same option because you're able to, basically contribute through your artificial person as opposed to through yourself. And one of the other parts is that the states, they do count that against your individual contribution. So I think that ties into what Mayor Pro Tem Johnston was talking about with the artificial or the extra workload on the clerk. They then have to keep tally of how much this individual contributed through their LLC. And more than that, they have to figure out what percentage of the LLC that individual owns, because they're actually capped under state law based off of that percentage as well. So it adds complicating factors for, again, what in my opinion, and I believe Mayor Pro Tem Johnston shares the same opinion, is allowing certain members of society, of the public, to contribute on a pre-tax basis.
Can I follow up on that?
Councilmember Gardner, and then we'll come to you, Mayor Coffman.
Okay.
Councilmember Gardner.
So, thank you. As far as the part of the answer related to the burden on the clerk, I appreciate that. However, I think even the sponsors would acknowledge that there are increased burdens from implementing this ordinance, and so stopping here seems there seems to be another reason besides just the burden on the clerk, because I think we can all acknowledge this ordinance will introduce a lot of significant work on our clerk's office. As far as, business entity types, we could go around and around all day, but from a tax perspective, corporations and LLCs are significantly different. And so, I think limiting corporate contributions where the ownership structure is based upon shareholders is completely different than on an LLC business entity. And that was a comment. I'm not asking a question.
Mayor Coffman? Oh, Councilmember Marcano, did you want to respond?
Oh, no, I just said understood. That's all. Sorry.
Mayor Coffman? You're muted.
Political contributions aren't deductible. I don't know what it has to do with dark money or Citizens United, but from my point of view, what I wanted is transparency, and that you may not know who is part of an LLC, but you know the name, address of an individual. And so that's why I wanted to move to make it all natural persons, all individuals.
Sure.
Councilmember McDonald, did you like to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I know that political contributions are not tax deductible for individuals, but if you're able to basically on a pre-tax basis contribute from an artificial person, and by that I mean you're not taking that money as income, so you're not paying income tax and things like that on it. I don't think that that's fair to people who are not in a position to own a business. So that's why I made that point, if that makes sense.
It's not deductible. Yeah.
What did you say? What was your response?
Oh, it's irrelevant, but it's really not deductible. They're still going to pay taxes on gross receipts, on the net revenue of the firm. But that's not important.
Okay. Is there additional questions on the? Do I see any other questions? Okay.
Member Lawson, sorry,
Councilmember Coombs.
making sure it's unmuted. So I just wanted to refer to the issue in the mayor's ordinance where things get referred to our city's election commission. That's an unpaid group of volunteers that meets on a monthly basis. And so the concern there is that they will not be able to respond in a timely manner and process in a timely manner complaints the way that the clerk would be able to. And they're also appointees of the council. So, and they serve at the pleasure of the council, whereas the third party adjudicator proposed in the Marcano Johnston proposal is a completely independent person that's selected by city staff, and city staff are also independent of council. They don't serve at the pleasure of council. They're insulated from any type of repercussions from elected officials, and I think that it's important that the people adjudicating these issues not be in any way subject to potential repercussions from elected officials on the basis of how they may render a judgment on a.
Mayor Coffman, would you like to respond? You're muted.
My proposal is fairly simple. If they don't have to prove intent. Either they violated it by having a contribution in excess of the limit, or they didn't. And so it's the clerk that makes the decision whether there's merit, and then refers it to the commission. The majority of the commission support having that authority.
And Councilmember Marcano, did you want to respond? Okay. Is there any other questions? Okay. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, and I do want to ask this, is there any objection to merging these two documents, these two proposals together? Is there any objection? I'm just...
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3. So we have Councilmember... Okay. So it looks like we have Councilmember Coombs, Councilmember Marcano, yes, Mayor Coffman.
I'd be opposed.
Okay. And Hiltz, okay. Myself. I just have
Councilmember Murillo.
Okay.
Berzins.
Okay, so it looks like we have Coombs, Marcano, Murillo, Mayor Coffman, Mayor Pro Tem Johnston, myself, and
Gruber.
And Councilmember
Berzins.
And Councilmember Berzins. Okay, I just had to bring that up. Do we have objections of moving the Johnston-Marcano proposal forward?
Object.
Object.
So it looks like we have Mayor Coffman, Councilmember Gruber, Councilmember Berzins, and Councilmember Bergan. Okay, so it looks like this one will move forward to the next council meeting. Do we have objections with moving the Kaufman proposal forward? To the next council meeting. Any objections?
Can you see us?
Yes. So we have Councilmember Coombs, Councilmember Marcano, Councilmember Murillo, Councilmember Lawson, Mayor Pro Tem Johnston,
Hiltz.
and Councilmember Hiltz. So it looks like that one will not move forward.
So just
I'm going to return the gavel back over to Mayor Coffman to continue the rest of the meeting.
before you do, I just
Oh, I'm sorry.
want to notify council that it will move forward and it will be on the agenda for, is it the 18th? For October 18th. 19th. Is it using my discretion as a member?
Okay.
Is there further discussion on any issue? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.